you're going to see panic like you've never seen in this country, in the world. Again, this is a generational, human, transformative event. And if you have not gotten that through your head, it's time to realize that, and realize whatever your career was, especially if it was, one of those average ones, may not be there for you after this. This is one of those things that is going to change the world forever, whether you like it or not.
You're listening to the Corbett Report.
Hello friends, James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com. It is currently the 18th of March 2020 here in Japan. It is still St. Patrick's Day in New York City, and although that generally would mean happiness and partying, and I would expect Jason Bermas to be out having fun with his friends, no, not this year, not in 2020. That's not the way 2020 is rolling. So today we're going to be talking once again to Jason Bermas. If you're not subscribed to him, why not? I wholeheartedly exhort people who have not been watching his coverage over the last few weeks to go back and do so, because you will see everything he's been talking about has been coming true in the news a few days later, and it's remarkable to watch, because obviously Jason knows what he's talking about, and he has been following this story like a hawk regarding specifically what's happening there in his backyard in New York State. Jason Bermas, thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me in this very important time. And it was a little bit more lighthearted 2 weeks ago when we talked, but let's face it, we're now in a situation where the mayor of New York City has openly stated within 48 hours they will decide whether or not to have self-isolation. He said he was on the phone with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Army Corps of Engineers is on the way. We know that New Rochelle was not a hot zone. It was a selectively tested zone to get the military there first for when there is panic and people do want to leave and can no longer leave, because that's the perfect spot to block off the Cuomo Bridge, the Washington Bridge, and of course the Lincoln Tunnel. And then in New York State, even in my neck of the woods right now, we have medical tents outside. We have the governor now texting all city goers, basically declaring a New York City lockdown, self-isolation that's so far unenforced, getting people prepared, because they're talking at us like children, while telling us that the Army Corps of Engineers will also be here to retrofit buildings, including SUNY dorms, into hospitals within the next few weeks. We'll also have drive-through centers where people can get tests run by FEMA. Local Walgreens and CVS will be used to that. And here's the thing, James. The selective testing has been extremely low in New York to keep not only the panic in New York down, but the global panic down, because it'll be beyond the United States, especially with the way the economy has crashed as we've predicted. Correct? So what they also announced today is by Thursday, they'll be testing 200 people a day in the city. And by Saturday to Monday, somewhere in that range, it will be up to 5,000 tests a day. With those results coming in, there will be massive fear at the amount of people that test positive to this, because a lot of people have been positive for this for months. It is just now that the martial law and the police state is rolling out, not only in New York, but the National Guard officially in 18 states.
Exactly right. And as I say, you've been talking about this for weeks and telling people what's coming. And as we speak, as we were recording this, apparently one of the big Twitter trends at this moment is NYC lockdown, because people are finally starting to understand it is coming. They're just prepping people to get ready for it. It is coming. So let's back it up a little bit. Let's set the stage, set the pieces. How did they prepare the public for this? Go over that selective testing in New Rochelle a little bit more so people understand why it's being done the way it is in order to prep the public.
Exactly. If you remember when the first positive test came in January, there became a controversy over whether the test worked or not, right? That was rather convenient. Oh, we could have false positives and whatnot. Now I believe that as a scam to slow the testing of everybody down and basically prepare people for what was to come. So when you had this outbreak from a lawyer within the city, instead of testing people around him in the city, you tested his family and a lawyer who was outside of the city, and then his family, and then people in that zone, because they said they were only going to be testing people that showed symptoms, although This is 10 to 100 times more infectious than the flu, and the majority of people that get it are asymptomatic. Well, that shows you would do selective testing and then say that hot zone was there. Anybody can look at a map. And basically, New Rochelle is a point where if you have the military, you can deploy them within 15 miles of each choke point. And then the city and Long Island are both landlocked. The vast majority of people, even though my state is huge, live in that city and not the rest of New York where we're spread out. So that's where you get the selective testing, because I've already heard them talking. This is the new ground zero. Today, Trump's press conference, what did they talk about? They talked about FDR times. De Blasio is talking about wartime measures. They invoked the airline industry has been hit harder than they were on 9/11. And that's why I'm calling this a 1929 meets 9/11 slow rollout event with a martial law flavor that we really don't know the future to.
No, and I'm absolutely stealing that. It's an excellent formulation, but I'm going to modify it. The formula is 1929 plus 1984 plus 911 equals 2020. That is exactly what we're goose-stepping our way into. 1929, no one in living memory really understands what it is we are about to go through. Because I think this will be worse than the Great Depression, because the bubble has been inflated so out of control especially over the past decade of utter central bank nonsense. So I don't think people are prepared for that in any sense. But on top of that, the martial law crackdowns, and as I'm sure you have said in the past, I know I've said in the past, when martial law comes, people are going to be cheering it on. And we're going to be given our enemies to boo at. Look at him. He went out during the isolation lockdown order. Oh, he deserves to be thrown in prison. Get him. We are going to be turned against anyone who would dare question authority during this time. Very much like after 9/11. You dare question the government and what it's doing on this wholly virtuous war of terror? And now it's not just anyone could be a potential terrorist. Anyone could be an asymptomatic carrier of this disease. So, everyone is a suspect. Everyone needs to be locked down, and people will actually be cheering it on. The mindset of this is crazy. And the worst part, again, like 9/11, World Trade Center, it was psychologically important, symbolically important, and also physically important in terms of actual world trade. It's so much worse when you're talking about all of Wall Street. One of the major financial hubs in the world is about to go under lockdown. What does that mean for the global economy? Put it in perspective for people. Why New York City? And why is this so important globally?
Well, when you look at New York City, I mean, its own economy is massive. But as I was talking about, even before we got together, what were they putting in place? They were putting in place a mechanism to stop trading. 3 times so far, they have invoked this mechanism as the market has fallen. Why? So they can slightly bring it back up artificially for moves to slow the death of this. Now, at the end, we know the infrastructure will be bought up by the survivors. And what will that infrastructure look like? Well, let me show you what that's going to look like. It's going to be like 2020 your papers, please. This was actually leaked to me today by a member of the railroad union. And part of that infrastructure obviously will be the railway system, will be the shipping system, will be the medical system, all the supplies that will need to be there. And factories eventually will probably be retrofitted in that World War II style where we're producing masks, ventilators, supplies, all these people out of work that test healthy, that want a job, that will be your new job. And you will get paperwork like this to travel to certain places. They're already talking about in New York, James, how there is not enough health workers already. Some of the more alarming language in these executive orders is that they can basically deputize anybody to be a nurse, anybody to take a medical sample, anybody to administer medicine. This has frightening implications beyond all of it. But when you go to the fact that they've pre-prepared with shutting down the stock market for minutes at a time, it's not going to be hours at a time next. It will be for days at a time. And you can bet by then you'll have massive bank runs because you're already starting to see them. And when you have massive bank runs, you will have bank holidays and you will officially be in visible hyperinflation. The mask will be off and people, James, like you know, are not always rational. and are probably going to panic.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty safe bet in situations like this. And I can already hear some people out there saying, well, yeah, but the stock market's phony and rigged anyway. Yeah, but that is the tip of the iceberg. And there's so much financial infrastructure that goes below that is predicated on or at least we can get a glimpse of what's happening in that little tip of that iceberg. And you're exactly right. Once the bank runs start and mass panic starts, again, all bets off the table. This is insanity. I am not relishing this. This is what we have been warning about, blaring sirens about for the last decade plus, and it is happening right now, and I hope people understand the severity and the gravity of that. But don't worry, Jason, because some anonymous poster on some internet forum board is going to work with the good side of the deep state in the intelligence and military community to... this is part of draining the swamp or something that's going on, right? I mean, we can all just wait for the savior to come in from on high. That's why we should be cheering on martial law. That's why we got into doing this, right, Jason? Because we wanted to cheer on the military in martial law scenario.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, my coverage is slowed on everything else because it's really hard for me to cover anything else right now because this is close to home. I have medical tents outside. I now know the military is on the way. I'm talking to my local law enforcement who I've known for years. They weren't law enforcement when I first knew them in some cases. The chief of police I've known for 20 plus years since he was a beat cop. I have loved ones in New York City where I believe that the hysteria, no matter what you think about the virus, is going to be the worst. The availability of foods and resources is going to be the worst. And these are people that I actually love. There's a face to it now. James, we were talking about, we'll see what it does from Italy. But for me, it is very real. And I've got to tell you, I take utter offense to those who believe in fan fiction and that somehow martial law is going to bring down the deep state, and people telling me that nobody's died of this thing and show me a name. Well, I want to show people something. Before you hear show me a name, you need to watch this press conference from now the 5th of March. And they gave names. They gave their phone numbers. They gave their email addresses. And these family members, they weren't treated human, in my opinion. And no matter what you think, whether this takes out 3.6% or 0.6%, or it's just the flu and it's 0.01%, whatever, these are human beings. And now they're American citizens and they speak your language and they look like you. So now it might be a little bit different. And the same in Europe. So what I'm telling people is get prepared. And I've also gotten another, a pushback, James, from other people who are like, well, you sound like a bootlicker. What am I supposed to do in my county? Am I supposed to arm myself against the military? First of all, I'm not trained. I've always said we should have that type of amendment. But if you don't think there's a very real possibility of gun sweeps, this is my county. They're not processing pistol permits. They took certain ammo off the shelves at Walmart here. This is going on nationwide. This is very, very real. Now, I am not saying one way or the other whether they will do this or not, but I know my household doesn't stand a chance against the National Guard. And I'm sorry if you don't want to hear that. And I don't love it. The last thing I want to see is the military on the streets. But physically, what can I do? Mentally and verbally, I can sound the alarm and tell people to resist as much as possible and show people valid information of what's going on. Most of the country is not prepared for military martial law takeovers and lockdowns. But that is the very reality that we will be living in, if not 1 week's time, 2 weeks' time max, James.
Sadly, you are spot on about this. And for people who haven't read it yet, I'm going to direct them to Your Guide to Surviving a Crisis, which I wrote last weekend, which makes the point that one of the most important things you can be doing right now, other than preparing for the inevitability of some form of lockdown or shelter in place or whatever coming to your area, one of the most important things is to draw your lines in the sand now. Understand what it is you will do and what it is you will not do. Where is that line? And what do you do when agents of the state, military, armed agents of the state come knocking on your door to whatever, ... give you the forced vaccine or whatever it is? Where is your line in the sand, and what will and will you not do? That is obviously not something I'm here to tell you what your line in the sand should be, but you have to decide that for yourself right now, because when you go into crisis mode, panicking, all bets are off the table, And that's not a space in which you want to be decision making. So stuff's getting real, and you better get real with it, everyone out there. Okay, so let's bring this back down to brass tacks. What are the next steps from here over the next 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours? Where do you think this is going?
Sure. So definitely within the next probably now 24 hours, they'll announce a lockdown of New York City, not followed with the military. You'll probably see that in the next 72 hours to, Friday, Saturday, the first military presence inside the city walls. That doesn't mean they're going to seal the gates at that point. But I think you're going to see a full lockdown of New York State probably Friday, Saturday. Once that domino falls, you'll already see counties in California. We've already seen San Francisco, for instance, really be under a containment zone. So those containment zones will be expanded. You'll also see military presence probably in some other major cities, Chicago being one of them in Illinois, etc. Then I believe you'll see lockdowns followed by what? Washington State, California, and Florida. Then the president announces a national lockdown, probably using local law enforcement for the most part. And you will see a bleeding in of the National Guard throughout the country. And you'll see a bleeding in of the Army Corps of Engineers and the real military in the hotspots, in the zones, and retrofitting of buildings as hospital. I mean, that's what you'll see on that end. You're going to see panic like you've never seen in this country, in the world. Again, this is a generational human transformative event. And if you have not gotten that through your head, it's time to realize that, and realize whatever your career was, especially if it was, one of those average ones, may not be there for you after this. This is one of those things that is going to change the world forever, whether you like it or not.
Speaking of which, we are sitting here in our position in the crow's nest, doing this for a living, looking at this information, trying to see what's coming, trying to warn people about it, and giving people actionable information that they can use in their lives. But obviously, we can only do that because we are supported by people out there who are helping this to happen. And I realize this is going to be an incredibly trying time for everyone. But let's face it, let's be honest, a lot of people are turning to outlets like yours and like mine for information right now, because it is valuable to have people in that crow's nest looking out over the horizon, looking at what's coming. So if you can, and if you do appreciate the work that, say, Jason is doing or that I'm doing, please support it. We need your support, especially during this incredibly trying time, because I'm going to be sitting here as long as I possibly can, giving as good an analysis as I possibly can, doing this full time so that hopefully we can help get through this together. But I do need your support. Jason needs your support. Jason, tell people where they can find your work and how they can support it.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate that, right now, YouTube has announced that they're just going to start deleting videos that don't go against their community standards without any kind of explanation at all, because they're short-staffed. If you want to support me, and guys, a lot of you have been great to me, especially recently, and believe me, I've bled every dollar into my family. I just spent another $500 right before this interview getting ready for this. So $5, $10, $15. The GoFundMe is how I do it. And I do have a Rockfin as well. And lo and behold, if they eventually do pull me off of YouTube, I'll be posting there. And I always post to Periscope, a.k.a. Twitter as well. I want you to share my stuff far and wide. There's no copyright on it. I'm not going to take offense if you take a segment or you repost. This is the most important time in our lives. I promise you that, because for a lot of people, whether you realize it or not, whether you think it's a joke that it's a boomer remover, they will never see their loved ones again. You remember the last time James and I talked, I said, maybe you want to get your loved ones out of these homes. And one day they announced it in New York, and the next day they announced it nationally. And some people will never hug their parents again. People need to realize this. This is a human event.
So many cascading consequences from this unfolding event. And I know, Jason, you're going to be there covering it, as I will. So I hope people will check it out. I will, of course, put the links to all of your different media platforms and socials and all of that so that people can follow what you are doing. I hope they do so, because you're there on the front lines. Like it or not, you're right there in the belly of the beast in New York State. So, I can't say I'm looking forward to seeing your coverage, but I am certainly following it, and let's put it that way. So, Jason, thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you now more than ever.
The Corbett Report is brought to you by the Corbett Report subscriber, a weekly newsletter featuring James Corbett's international forecaster editorial, recommended reading and viewing, discounts on Corbett Report DVDs, and once a month, a subscriber-only video. Sign up today to start receiving your copy at corbettreport.com/support.